maid's daughter slept on a flight until the captain asked in fear, "Any fighter pilot on board?" The night started like any other flight across the Pacific. Passengers settled in, attendants moved quietly through the aisles, and for most, the gentle hum of the engines was a comfort. But in the middle of the ocean, everything changed. A violent storm struck, instruments began to fail, and then came the chilling announcement: "We've lost control. The captain is unresponsive. Is there any pilot on board?" Silence filled the cabin. People prayed, cried, held hands, until a quiet teenage girl stood up from economy class. A passenger tried to stop her. "Sit down, honey, it's not safe." But she shook her head and whispered, "It's okay. I can help." No one could have guessed what would happen next. This is the story of how an ordinary teenager, dismissed as just the maid's daughter, was thrust into the cockpit of a dying Boeing 777 and into legend. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A sleeping girl was about to fly a plane through a storm that had grounded an entire country. This is the story of that day. It is a story about how courage is not measured in years, and how wisdom can be found in the most unexpected of hearts. The gentle hum of the Boeing 777's engines was a lullaby. For 15-year-old Amelia Vance, curled up in seat 34B, it was the only peace she had known all day. She slept the deep, dreamless sleep of youth, her head resting against the cool plastic of the window. Her blonde hair, tied in a simple ponytail, caught the dim cabin light. She wore faded jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt, clothes that spoke of comfort, not style. She looked like any other teenager on a long flight from Tokyo to San Francisco. Just another passenger, invisible and unassuming. In the spacious comfort of first class, Walter Harrington adjusted his silk tie. He glanced impatiently at his gold watch. He was a man who measured his life in profitable quarters and successful acquisitions. Beside him, his wife Eleanor reapplied her lipstick, while their daughter, Jessica, also 15, scrolled through photos on her top-of-the-line phone. They were returning from a luxury tour of Japan. For them, this flight was merely a bridge between two worlds of privilege. Walter had magnanimously gifted 2 economy tickets to his longtime housekeeper, Maria Vance, and her daughter, Amelia. It was a gesture that cost him nothing. He used expiring airline miles, but bought him a sense of charitable superiority. He had made a point of telling his business partners about his generosity. He never mentioned that Maria had worked for his family for 20 years, raising his own daughter while hers often waited alone at home. He never mentioned the birthdays and holidays Maria had missed with her own child to serve his. As the plane soared over the vast, dark expanse of the Pacific Ocean, a sudden, violent jolt shook the cabin. Amelia's eyes fluttered open. Outside her window, the serene night had vanished. In its place was a churning cauldron of black clouds, lit by terrifying, spidery veins of lightning. The seatbelt sign flashed on with an insistent chime. Passengers exchanged nervous glances. The turbulence grew worse, tossing the massive aircraft like a toy boat in a bathtub. A voice, strained and tight, crackled over the intercom. "Folks, this is your captain, Robert Miller. We've hit some unexpected weather. It's a bit rougher than we anticipated. Please remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened." But there was another sound beneath the captain's forced calm. A tremor. A flicker of fear that every person on board could feel in their bones. Walter Harrington scoffed. "Amateurs," he muttered to his wife. "A little chop and they sound like they've never flown before. This is why I prefer the private jet." Minutes stretched into an eternity of stomach-lurching drops and bone-rattling shakes. Children began to cry. The flight attendants moved through the aisle, their faces pale masks of professionalism, offering reassurances that sounded hollow against the roar of the storm. Then, a new voice came over the sound system. It was younger, higher-pitched, and trembling with an unmistakable panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer David Chun." He took a ragged breath. We have a critical medical emergency in the cockpit. Captain Miller is unresponsive." A collective gasp swept through the cabin. The nervous murmurs erupted into audible fear. "We are flying through a severe, unforecasted cyclonic storm system," the co-pilot continued, his voice cracking under the strain. The autopilot is struggling to compensate. The storm's electrical interference is causing critical instrument failures. He paused, and the next words fell into a pool of terrified silence. Is there a pilot on board? Please, we need help. Is there anyone on this plane with piloting experience? A few moments of silence passed, filled only by the howl of the wind outside. No one moved. Walter Harrington unbuckled his seatbelt. Well, it's about time someone competent took charge, he announced loudly to the first-class cabin. I've flown with my personal pilot for years. I've logged hundreds of hours in the co-pilot seat of my Gulfstream G650. I know the procedures. A flight attendant rushed to his side. Sir, we appreciate that, but we need someone with commercial or military certification. Don't be ridiculous, Walter snapped, puffing out his chest. Experience is experience. Who else on this plane has spent more time in a cockpit than me? Certainly no one back there in economy. His dismissive wave was aimed toward the rear of the plane, where Amelia sat watching, her heart pounding against her ribs. The co-pilot's voice returned, now laced with raw desperation. Please, the captain, his condition is worsening. The control column it's not responding correctly. It feels like we're flying through concrete. The fly-by-wire system is failing. Is there a fighter pilot on board? Anyone with experience in extreme weather and systems failure recovery? Please, identify yourself now. The request was so specific, so utterly hopeless, that it extinguished the last embers of hope for many passengers. A fighter pilot? On a commercial flight? It was an impossible fantasy. People began to pray. Some pulled out their phones, trying to type final messages to loved ones. The plane dropped another 1,000 feet in a gut-wrenching plunge, and screams filled the cabin. Through it all, Amelia Vance sat perfectly still. Her mind was a whirlwind of memories. She saw her grandfather's study, the walls covered in maps and diagrams of aircraft. She heard his voice, calm and steady, explaining the physics of a high-altitude stall. She felt the worn leather of his old flight jacket, which she sometimes wore when she missed him most. The sky isn't empty, Mia, he used to tell her, his eyes twinkling. It's full of roads and rivers, mountains and valleys. You just have to learn how to see them. Most pilots fly the plane. A great pilot lets the plane fly through them. Her grandfather was General Michael the Ghost Vance. He was a legend in the Air Force, a test pilot who flew experimental jets that broke speed and altitude records. He was a hero who had flown in 3 wars, a tactical genius whose maneuvers were still taught at the Air Force Academy. But to Amelia, he was just Grandpa, the man who taught her to see the world differently. He had been her teacher, her mentor, her best friend. After a training accident left him grounded, he had poured all his knowledge, all his passion for the sky, into his granddaughter. He had never let her fly a real plane, but for 10 years, he had trained her mind. He made her study fluid dynamics, meteorology, and avionics engineering. He put her in his state-of-the-art home flight simulator for thousands of hours, programming impossible scenarios. Engine failures, catastrophic systems malfunctions, flights through hurricanes and sandstorms. He taught her not just to fly, but to think, to analyze, to feel the aircraft as an extension of her own body. She knew the Boeing 777. Her grandfather had made her study its schematics until she knew every wire, every hydraulic line, every circuit breaker by heart. She knew this storm, too. She recognized the dangerous green tint in the clouds from the simulator's weather modeling. She understood what flying through concrete meant. It was a compressor stall caused by massive hail ingestion in the engines. She knew the autopilot was not just struggling, it was actively making things worse by applying the wrong corrections. She looked at the terrified faces around her. She saw the flight attendant trying to calm a crying mother. She saw a man in a business suit staring blankly at the seat in front of him, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. And she saw Walter Harrington, preening in the aisle, basking in the attention as he argued with the cabin crew, claiming his experience as a passenger made him qualified to save them all. Amelia felt a cold knot of fear in her stomach. But beneath the fear was something else. It was her grandfather's voice, a calm whisper in the storm of her thoughts. Fear is just a tool, Mia. It tells you where the danger is. It's what you do with it that defines you. Slowly, deliberately, she unbuckled her seatbelt. Her movements were small and precise, a stark contrast to the chaotic jolts of the aircraft. She stood up in the narrow aisle. A nearby passenger, A woman with tears streaming down her face grabbed her arm. "Honey, sit down. It's not safe." Amelia gently removed the woman's hand. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but clear, cutting through the noise. "It's okay. I can help." She started walking toward the front of the plane. Her path took her right past Walter Harrington, who was still loudly proclaiming his qualifications to the head flight attendant. "I'm telling you, I know exactly what to do," he boomed. "Get that kid on the radio and let me talk him through it." He noticed Amelia approaching and sneered. "And where do you think you're going, little girl? Back to the restroom? You should be in your seat." Amelia stopped and looked him directly in the eye. She didn't have the height or the physical presence to intimidate him, but her gaze was unwavering. It was the calm, analytical gaze of a pilot. The gaze of her grandfather. "My name is Amelia Vance," she said, her voice steady despite the violent shaking of the floor beneath her feet. "I need to get to the cockpit. I believe the engines are in a repeating compressor stall due to hail ingestion. The pilot needs to manually decrease the engine's angle of attack by lowering the aircraft's nose, even if it means losing altitude. He needs to do it now, before the turbine blades fracture." The flight attendant stared at her, her mouth slightly open. The technical precision of the statement was jarring, coming from a girl who looked like she should be worried about a math test, not catastrophic engine failure. Walter Harrington let out a bark of derisive laughter. "A compressor what? What have you been doing, watching movies on your phone? This is a real emergency, not a video game. Now run along." He turned his back on her, dismissing her completely. "As I was saying," he continued to the flight attendant, "the first rule of any turbulence is to maintain altitude at all costs." "That's wrong," Amelia said, her voice rising with a new urgency. "Maintaining altitude is what's stalling the engines. The airflow is being disrupted. They're suffocating." The plane lurched violently, and a terrible grinding sound came from the right engine, followed by a bright flash of orange light visible through the windows. Screams erupted again. "Sir, please," the flight attendant begged Walter. "Return to your seat." To Amelia, she said, "Honey, I don't know what you're talking about, but we can't let you into the cockpit." Just then, the cockpit door opened. First Officer David Chun stood there, clinging to the frame for support. His uniform was disheveled, and his face was as white as a sheet. He was barely older than 25, and stark terror was written in his eyes. "The right engine just flamed out," he stammered, his voice choked with panic. "The autopilot is gone. I can't hold her steady. I need help. Someone. Anyone." Walter Harrington saw his chance. He pushed past the flight attendant, his face a mask of self-importance. "I'm here, son. Walter Harrington. I own a Gulfstream. Tell me what to do." The co-pilot looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes, ready to cling to any offer of help. But before Walter could take another step, Amelia spoke again, her voice ringing with an authority that defied her age. "First Officer Chun," she said, pitching her voice to be heard over the groaning of the airframe. "What is your current airspeed and altitude? What is your pitch angle? Are you getting any thrust from engine number 2? David Chin's head snapped toward her. His training automatically kicked in, and he answered without thinking. 250 knots, falling. 33,000 feet. Pitch is +8 degrees. Engine 2 is unresponsive. Core temperature is spiking. You're too slow and your nose is too high." Amelia stated instantly. "You're on the edge of a full aerodynamic stall. You have less than 20 seconds to get the nose down." She took a step forward. "My name is Amelia Vance. My grandfather was General Michael Vance. He taught me everything he knew. You need to let me in there. Now." The mention of the name hung in the air. For a young pilot like David Chun, General Michael the Ghost, Vance was not just a hero. He was a god of aviation. A legend. He looked from the arrogant, blustering businessman to the small, blonde girl whose eyes held no panic, only a chilling, absolute focus. "You're the Ghost, granddaughter?" he whispered, a flicker of disbelief and desperate hope in his eyes. "Yes," Amelia said simply. "And right now, I'm the only chance you've got." Walter Harrington stared, his face turning a shade of purple. "This is insane. You're going to listen to a child? To my maid's daughter? Her mother cleans my toilets. I forbid it. This is my life, my family's lives on the line. I will not have them gambled away on some fantasy." The insult, so personal and cruel, struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow. She saw a flash of deep hurt in the flight attendant's eyes. But Amelia's own expression didn't change. She kept her gaze locked on the co-pilot. She didn't have time for Walter Harrington. The plane was dying around them. David Chun looked at the failing instruments over his shoulder, then back at Amelia. In her calm, confident face, he saw the faintest echo of the legendary general he'd only read about in books. It was a gamble, an insane, career-ending, life-or-death gamble. But looking at Walter Harrington, then back at Amelia, he knew who he would trust. "Get in," he said, his voice trembling. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the cockpit. "Get in now." As Amelia slipped past him into the chaos of the cockpit, she heard Walter Harrington's furious roar behind her. "You'll be responsible for this. When we all die, I'll hold you responsible." The cockpit door slammed shut, sealing them off from the panic in the cabin. Amelia was no longer a 15-year-old girl in an economy-class seat. She was in the only place in the world she felt she truly belonged. And she was flying into the heart of the storm. Inside, the scene was worse than she could have imagined. Alarms blared in a deafening chorus of electronic screams. Red and yellow warning lights flashed across the control panel. Captain Miller was slumped in his seat, his face a ghastly gray. A flight attendant and a passenger who identified as a doctor working frantically over him. David Chin's hands were shaking so badly, he could barely grip the control yoke. The plane was shuddering violently, a wounded beast on the verge of falling from the sky. Amelia's mind went quiet. The fear vanished, replaced by a crystalline clarity. The thousands of hours in the simulator, her grandfather's lessons, all of it coalesced into a single point of focus. She didn't see chaos. She saw a problem, a complex, deadly problem that she had been trained her entire life to solve. She pointed to a series of switches on the overhead panel. "Disconnect the autothrottle and the flight directors," she commanded, her voice sharp and clear, leaving no room for argument. "They're getting bad data from the iced-over pitot tubes. They're fighting you. Kill them now." David Chun, startled by her decisiveness, fumbled for the switches. "Disconnect? That's against every emergency protocol." "The protocols were written for pilots, not for undertakers," Amelia shot back, her voice like ice. "The book is useless here. That storm out there isn't in the book. Do it." Her certainty was absolute. With trembling fingers, David flipped the switches. The plane immediately stopped its most violent shuddering, though it was still being battered by the storm. A small measure of control had been returned. Amelia's eyes scanned the dizzying array of gauges and screens, absorbing dozens of streams of information at once. "Okay, engine 2 is gone. Forget it. We're a very heavy glider right now. We need to restart engine 1. We need clean air." Her eyes darted to the weather radar display. It was a terrifying mass of red and magenta, indicating extreme turbulence and hail. But she saw something else. A pattern. A tiny, almost imperceptible channel of less intense weather. "A river in the sky. There," she said, pointing to a spot on the screen. "That's our way out. It's a shear wind corridor between two convective cells. It's going to be rough, but the air will be cleaner there." David stared at the screen. "That's not a corridor, that's suicide. It leads directly into the core of the storm." "No," Amelia said, her voice calm and patient, like a teacher explaining a difficult concept. "It goes under the core. The updraft from the main cell is creating a pocket of stable, descending air. It's a meteorological canyon. Grandpa called it a ghost current. It won't show up on a standard Doppler radar. You have to know how to look for the pressure differentials." She reached out and her fingers danced across a control panel, inputting a series of commands with a speed and confidence that left David speechless. She was manually recalibrating the radar's frequency to look for temperature gradients instead of precipitation. A new image appeared on the screen, and there it was, a faint, dark blue line snaking through the heart of the crimson storm. A ghost current. It was real. "My God," David whispered in awe. "No one would ever think to do that." "We're going to fly into that canyon," Amelia announced. "It's our only shot. Take the controls. I'll guide you through it. On my mark, push the nose down to a -10-degree pitch. It's going to feel like we're falling out of the sky. We have to do it to gain airspeed. Do you trust me?" David looked into the eyes of the 15-year-old girl beside him, the maid's daughter, a child who was quoting the secret techniques of a dead aviation legend. He saw no hint of doubt in her. He saw nothing but the mission. He nodded, his hands tightening on the yoke. I trust you. Good, Amelia said. Now, fly the plane. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, chaos had turned to resignation for many. Walter Harrington, however, was still fuming. His pride, more valuable to him than his life, had been wounded. He could not accept being upstaged by his housekeeper's daughter. This is a disgrace, he snarled to his wife, Eleanor. They've put a child in charge. A delinquent who probably learned everything she knows from a computer game. Eleanor, for the first time, looked at her husband with an expression of weary disgust. Walter, be quiet. That delinquent is the only one who sounded like she knew what she was talking about. You wanted to maintain altitude, she said to lower the nose. And then the engine exploded. The simple, undeniable truth of her statement silenced him for a moment. His daughter, Jessica, who had been listening from the row behind, leaned forward. Daddy, Amelia she's really smart. She used to talk about flying with her grandpa all the time. I thought she was just making it up. Walter's face contorted with rage. Don't you defend her. Her mother is our servant. What could she possibly know? He unbuckled his seatbelt again, a wild, desperate idea forming in his mind. I'm going to put a stop to this. I'll get on the radio myself. I'll call the authorities. I'll tell them the plane has been hijacked by a lunatic teenager. He stood up and lurched toward the cockpit door just as Amelia's voice came over the intercom. It was completely transformed. Gone was the quiet teenager. This was the voice of command. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Amelia Vance. I am in the cockpit with First Officer Chun. We have lost one engine and are maneuvering through the storm to find stable air. In a moment, the plane will begin a steep descent. It will feel alarming. It will be loud. It is intentional, and it is necessary to save the aircraft. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for a high-G maneuver. Secure all loose items and yourselves. Now, the authority in her voice was absolute. It was the voice of a commander, of a leader, and it brooked no argument. Even Walter Harrington froze in the aisle, an involuntary shiver running down his spine. The flight attendants, hearing a voice that finally sounded like it was in control, immediately began shouting instructions, their training taking over. In the cockpit, Amelia began the countdown. 3, 2, 1. Push. Now. David shoved the control yoke forward with all his might. The massive Boeing 777 nosed over into a terrifying dive. The world outside the cockpit window became a swirling vortex of black clouds and lightning. The sound of the wind shrieking over the fuselage rose to a deafening roar. Inside the cabin, passengers screamed as they were pressed hard against their seatbelts by the negative G-forces. Loose objects, laptops, purses, service trays, flew through the air. Walter Harrington, caught standing in the aisle, was flung upward, his head striking the ceiling with a sickening thud before he crashed back down onto an armrest, his arm twisting at an unnatural angle. He cried out in pain, a pathetic sound lost in the greater noise of the dive. Hold it steady. Amelia yelled over the alarms. Keep the wings level. Watch your rudder. The crosswind is trying to flip us. Use your feet. David was fighting the plane with every ounce of his strength. The controls felt like they were set in concrete. I can't. She's not responding. Yes, she is. Amelia countered, her eyes glued to the instruments. Don't fight her. Feel the air. Let the plane settle into the current. You're trying to muscle her, but she's a dancer. You have to let her dance. Her words were strange, poetic, but somehow they made sense. David relaxed his death grip on the yoke just a fraction, trying to feel what she was feeling. And then he felt it. A subtle shift. The plane was no longer just a machine. It was a living thing, communicating through the vibrations in the controls. It wanted to fly. Altitude, 15,000 feet. Amelia said, her voice a tense whisper. Air is getting smoother. The hail is stopping. Look at the engine 1 instruments. The core temperature is dropping. The pressure is stabilizing. She pointed. It's ready. Try the ignition sequence. Now. David's hand moved to the engine start switch. He took a deep breath and flipped it. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, a low rumble began, growing into a steady, powerful hum. The green light on the instrument panel, the most beautiful light David had ever seen, flickered to life. Engine 1 was back. A wave of relief so profound it was physically painful washed over him. He started to laugh, a hysterical, half-sobbing sound. It worked. Oh my God, it worked. Don't celebrate yet, Amelia warned, her focus unbroken. We're still in the storm, and we're 10 tons over our recommended landing weight. We need to find a place to land, and we need to do it fast. She turned to the communication panel. I'm going to try to contact someone who can help us. Instead of dialing the standard civilian air traffic control frequency, she keyed in a long, encrypted military code. A code her grandfather had made her memorize years ago. For a day I hope never comes, he had told her. She keyed the microphone. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is civilian flight, Trans-Pacific 788. We are in distress. Is there any station that reads me on this channel? I am requesting assistance for call sign Ghost Rider. For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice, crisp and professional, cut through the noise. It was a voice that had been aged by decades of command. Trans-Pacific 788, this is United States Air Force Command, Hickam Field. We have not heard the call sign Ghost Rider in 20 years. Identify yourself. Immediately, Amelia took a breath. This is Amelia Vance. I am the granddaughter of General Michael Vance. I am at the controls of a Boeing 777 with one engine out, flying through Typhoon Agnesa. We need a runway. We need it now. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the radio. Then the voice came back, and all the professional detachment was gone. It was replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. Mia? Is that really you? This is General Peterson. I served with your grandfather. We thought you were a myth he made up. The myth is flying the plane, General. Amelia replied, a faint, weary smile touching her lips for the first time. And she would really like your help to land it. The air in the command center at Hickam Air Force Base was thick with tension. On the main screen, a satellite map showed Typhoon Agnesa as a monstrous, swirling vortex of red and purple that had swallowed a vast portion of the Pacific. Flights were grounded across the entire west coast and all of Hawaii. Nothing was flying in or out. The storm was a no-go zone, absolute and terrifying. General Mark Peterson, a man whose face was a roadmap of a long and decorated career, stood before the screen, his arms crossed. He had been monitoring the storm for 72 hours straight, a grim watch over an unstoppable force of nature. When the call came through on the encrypted channel, a channel that had been silent for 2 decades, his head snapped up. He listened, his expression shifting from professional focus to disbelief, and then to a profound, heart-stopping shock that rippled through the entire command room. The operators and technicians exchanged bewildered glances. General Peterson knew Michael Vance personally. He had been a young lieutenant when Vance was already a living legend. He knew about the Ghost's unorthodox training methods and his almost mystical understanding of aerodynamics. And he had heard the rumors, the tall tales Michael used to tell in the officers' club after a few drinks, about a prodigy granddaughter he was training to be better than he ever was. He'd always dismissed it as the proud ramblings of an old warrior. Now, that myth was on the other end of the line, flying a crippled passenger jet through the heart of a superstorm. Patch her through the main speakers, Peterson commanded, his voice a low growl. Give me a direct link to her avionics. I want to see what she's seeing. Scramble 2 Raptors from the 199th. I don't care about the storm. I want eyes on that plane. Give me the schematics for a Boeing 777-200ER. I want every engineer from the maintenance wing in this room 5 minutes ago. Move. The command center exploded into a frenzy of controlled chaos. People shouted orders, fingers flew across keyboards, and screens flickered to life with new data. Within moments, Amelia's voice filled the room, as calm and clear as if she were calling from the next office. We have stabilized on a heading of 09 or 5. We are flying on one engine and manual controls. The fuselage has sustained significant stress, and I suspect potential damage to the port side flaps from the hail. We are heavy, low on fuel, and we need the longest runway you've got. General Peterson stepped closer to the microphone, his mind racing. Mia, this is Mark Peterson. Your grandfather. He would be so proud. He paused, forcing the emotion from his voice. Okay, Ghost Rider, listen up. Hickam Field is your destination. The main runway is 10,000 feet. We are clearing it for you now. The storm is directly over the island, but we have a break in the crosswinds predicted in approximately 40 minutes. Can you stay airborne that long? In the cockpit of the 777, Amelia looked at her fuel gauge. The numbers were dropping faster than they should. The damaged engine, even when shut down, was creating drag. Fuel is critical, General. 40 minutes is pushing it to the absolute limit. We'll be landing on fumes. Understood, Peterson replied, his gaze fixed on the telemetry data now streaming onto one of the screens. He could see her airspeed, her altitude, the strain on the airframe. What he saw made his blood run cold. The numbers were all wrong. The plane was flying, but by all metrics, it shouldn't have been. It was a miracle of pure pilot skill. Mia, the Raptors are on their way. Call signs Raptor 1 and Raptor 2. They will be your eyes. They will fly formation with you and visually inspect the aircraft for damage. Don't worry about the storm. My pilots are the best in the world. Second best. Amelia's voice corrected him gently, a shadow of her grandfather's wry humor in her tone. The comment sent a ripple of astonishment through the listening command center. A handful of older officers who had known General Vance actually smiled. It was exactly what he would have said. All right, second best, Peterson conceded, a ghost of a smile touching his own lips. Stay on this channel. Talk to me. Tell me everything the plane is telling you. And so began the longest 40 minutes of everyone's lives. Amelia's voice became the calm center of the storm, not just for the command center, but for the passengers on her plane. David Chun, now her devoted co-pilot, had switched her voice back to the cabin intercom, believing that hearing her confident, steady instructions was the only thing keeping the passengers from descending into complete madness. They could hear her talking to the general, her language a stream of technical jargon that was nevertheless hypnotic in its precision. General, the portside hydraulics are showing a pressure drop. I'm compensating with the rudder trim, but it's sluggish. I think we've lost some fluid. Copy that, Ghost Rider. The engineers here confirm that could affect your landing gear deployment. We're running simulations now. Tell them to focus on asymmetrical flap deployment. If the port flaps don't extend, she's going to try to roll on me the moment I slow down. Back in the cabin, the passengers listened in stunned silence. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. They understood that this young girl, this maid's daughter, was engaged in a high-stakes, long-distance conversation with the United States military about how to save their lives. She was not a child playing a game. She was a commander in the field. Jessica Harrington sat with her mother, her phone forgotten. She was listening to Amelia's voice, and for the first time, she saw the girl she had always ignored as something more. She remembered all the times Amelia had tried to talk to her about stars, about science, about the pictures of airplanes her grandpa sent her. Jessica had always brushed her off, more interested in fashion and gossip. Now, that same quiet, nerdy girl was their only hope. Her father, Walter, was a pathetic sight. He was slumped in a seat near the galley, cradling his broken arm. A flight attendant had given him some ice, but the pain was nothing compared to the agony of his humiliation. He listened to Amelia's voice, and every calm, competent word was a fresh stab to his ego. He had been so wrong, so publicly and catastrophically wrong. He, the master of the universe, the man with the private jet and the gold watch, was nothing. Worse than nothing. He was a liability. He had almost gotten them all killed with his arrogant ignorance. He saw the looks in the other passengers' eyes. They weren't looks of sympathy for his injury. They were looks of pure contempt. He had shown them his true character in the crisis, and it was ugly and small. The maid's daughter, the girl he saw as less than human, had shown them hers, and it was heroic. The world had turned upside down, and Walter Harrington was crushed beneath it. Ghost Rider, this is Raptor 1. I have a visual. The voice of the fighter pilot cut through the radio chatter, sharp and professional. You have a big bird, and she is hurt bad. Confirming major damage to the trailing edge of the portside wing. Looks like a section of the flap assembly is gone. Repeat, a piece of your flap is missing. And your number 2 engine looks like it went through a meat grinder. Amelia's hands tightened on the controls. Copy that, Raptor 1. Is the landing gear down and locked? There was a pause. It's down, but I'm not seeing 3 green. Your nose gear looks crooked. It's not fully extended. The news was a hammer blow. Landing with a partially deployed nose gear was incredibly dangerous. The gear could collapse on touchdown, sending the plane cartwheeling down the runway in a fiery explosion. In the Hickam Command Center, General Peterson swore under his breath. Give me the fire crews. I want every piece of emergency equipment we have lining that runway. I want it covered in foam from end to end. He keyed the mic. Mia, did you copy that? I copied, General. Amelia's voice replied, betraying no hint of fear. It changes the procedure, that's all. We'll have to land on the main gear only. Hold the nose off the runway for as long as possible. We'll need to be gentle. Gentle is not an option with a 30-knot crosswind. Peterson countered, his voice grim. This is going to be a controlled crash, Mia. Every landing is a controlled crash, General, she replied, quoting one of her grandfather's favorite sayings. This one is just a little more controlled than most. She turned to David Chun. His face was slick with sweat. He was a good pilot, but he was in way over his head. He was flying on raw courage and his newfound faith in the teenage girl beside him. David, Amelia said, her voice soft but firm. I need you to handle the throttles. When I call for it, you will need to give me asymmetrical thrust. More power to the right engine to counteract the drag from the damaged wing. Your timing has to be perfect. Can you do that? He nodded, his eyes wide. I can do it. I know you can, she said, giving him a look of complete confidence that he felt in his very soul. We are 10 miles out, she announced over the radio, beginning our final approach. The world outside the cockpit was still a gray, violent mess, but through a break in the clouds, they could finally see it. A string of lights. The runway. It was the most beautiful sight in the world. Amelia began the delicate, terrifying process of landing the crippled jet. It fought her every step of the way. The wind battered them, trying to push them off course. The damaged wing made the plane want to roll over. Amelia's feet danced on the rudder pedals, her hands making 1,000 tiny adjustments to the yoke. She was no longer just flying the plane. She was willing it to fly. 500 feet, she called out, her voice a low monotone. 400. Keep the speed at 140 knots. A little more power to the right engine, David. 300. The crosswind is picking up. Hold her steady, came the voice of General Peterson over the radio. You're looking good, Ghost Rider. Just a little longer. In the cabin, everyone was braced for impact. They held hands with strangers, whispering prayers. They could hear the wind screaming. They could feel the plane shuddering, groaning under the immense strain. They could see the runway lights getting closer and closer through the rain-streaked windows. 100 feet, Amelia's voice was tight. 50, 20, 10. The main landing gear, the two big sets of wheels under the wings, touched the runway. The touchdown was impossibly soft. For a moment, it seemed like a perfect landing. But the hardest part was yet to come. Hold the nose up, David yelled. Hold it up. Amelia was pulling back on the yoke with all her strength, using the plane's elevators to keep the damaged nose gear from slamming into the runway. The 777 was roaring down the tarmac at over 100 miles per hour on just its two main wheels, a terrifying, high-speed balancing act. She's slowing down, David shouted. 80 knots. 70. The nose of the plane was getting heavier. Amelia's arms were burning with the strain. She couldn't hold it much longer. Brace, she shouted into the intercom, her last command. At 60 knots, the nose finally dropped. The damaged landing gear hit the foam-covered runway with a sickening crunch of metal. It held for a second, then folded backward, collapsing completely. The nose of the aircraft slammed into the ground. A shower of sparks erupted as the metal fuselage scraped along the concrete. The plane veered violently to the left, skidding sideways off the runway and plowing into the muddy grass. It spun around in a great, groaning arc of tortured metal before finally, shuddering, it came to a stop. For a long, terrible moment, there was only silence. The alarms in the cockpit had died. The roar of the wind was gone. All that could be heard was the ticking of cooling metal and the sound of the pouring rain. Then, the emergency lights flickered on, casting the cabin in a ghostly green glow. And a single sound broke the silence. Someone started to clap. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire cabin was filled with a thunderous, weeping, laughing roar of applause. They had made it. They were alive. In the cockpit, Amelia let go of the controls. Her arms dropped to her sides, heavy and useless. Her hands were shaking. Now that it was over, the adrenaline began to fade, and the enormity of what she had just done washed over her. She was just a girl. A 15-year-old girl who had just landed a jumbo jet in a hurricane. She leaned back in the pilot's seat and closed her eyes, utterly spent. David Chun was staring at her, his face a mixture of awe and reverence. He reached out a trembling hand and touched her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. "Amelia, you did it." The cockpit door was thrown open, and emergency crews swarmed in. They saw the unconscious captain, the shaken co-pilot, and the small, blonde girl in the captain's chair. Outside, the evacuation slides had deployed. Passengers were sliding down into the welcoming arms of firefighters and medics. They were crying, hugging, and looking back at the battered, broken plane that had somehow, against all odds, brought them safely to the ground. They were all looking for one person. High on a gantry in the Hickam Command Center, General Mark Peterson pulled off his headset. He stared at the screen, which showed a live feed of the crash site. He saw the passengers safe on the ground. He saw the plane, broken but intact. He saw a small figure with blonde hair being helped out of the cockpit by a flight attendant. He turned to the stunned engineers and operators around him. "Let the record show," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that on this day, the Ghost flew again." The rain fell in a steady, cleansing sheet over the runway at Hickam Field. The flashing lights of a dozen emergency vehicles painted the battered fuselage of Trans-Pacific 788 in strobing shades of red, white, and blue. The last of the passengers were being led away to a temporary shelter, wrapped in warm blankets, their faces a mixture of shock, exhaustion, and a dawning, miraculous joy. They were alive. They chattered excitedly, their voices overlapping, but one name was repeated over and over again like a mantra: Amelia. Amelia Vance stood on the tarmac, a borrowed Air Force jacket draped over her small shoulders. The rain plastered her blonde hair to her forehead. She looked pale and overwhelmed, a child lost in a world of giants and flashing lights. The adrenaline had completely abandoned her, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a tremor in her hands she couldn't control. A medic was gently trying to guide her toward an ambulance, but she resisted, her gaze fixed on the wounded aircraft she had just tamed. It looked like a great, sleeping beast, majestic even in its ruin. General Peterson approached her, his boots splashing in the puddles. He stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. He was flanked by two stern-looking Air Force officers. For a moment, no one spoke. The general simply looked at her, his eyes taking in her youth, her worn-out clothes, her quiet, unshakable stillness. He was trying to reconcile the image of the girl in front of him with the preternaturally calm, impossibly skilled pilot he had just spoken to for 40 agonizing minutes. "Amelia Vance," he said, his voice softer than she expected. She nodded, unable to find her own voice. "I'm General Peterson." He took a step closer. "On behalf of the United States Air Force, and I suspect every single person on that plane, I want to thank you. What you did here today was impossible." Amelia just shook her head slightly. "I just did what my grandfather taught me." "Your grandfather," Peterson said with a wry, sad smile, "was the only pilot I ever knew who would have even attempted what you just pulled off. He would have loved this. The sheer, glorious, insane audacity of it." He looked at the plane, then back at her. "He always said the best pilots have a feel for the sky, a sixth sense. He called it listening to the air. I never really understood what he meant. Until today." From the crowd of evacuated passengers, a figure emerged, running awkwardly toward them. It was Jessica Harrington, her expensive clothes soaked and muddy. Her parents were behind her, Eleanor looking shocked and Jessica's father, Walter, his face a mask of pain and shame, his broken arm now in a makeshift sling. Jessica stopped in front of Amelia, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the rain. "Amelia," she choked out. "Oh my God, Amelia. You saved us." For years, Jessica had been the center of her own universe, a world in which Amelia was a peripheral, almost invisible character. The maid's daughter, the quiet girl who was always there, but never really seen. Now, standing before her, Jessica saw her for the first time. She saw the strength, the intelligence, the incredible, hidden power that she had been too self-absorbed to ever notice. I'm so sorry," Jessica stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt. "For everything. For how I treated you. For how my dad, for everything." Before Amelia could respond, Walter Harrington shuffled forward, his eyes fixed on the ground. He looked like a broken man. His tailored suit was ruined, his hair was a mess, and his arrogant posture had been replaced by a defeated slump. He stood before this 15-year-old girl, the daughter of his housekeeper, and he was forced to confront the wreckage of his own character. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? Sorry for treating you and your mother like furniture for 20 years. Sorry for almost getting everyone killed because my ego is more fragile than a teacup? He opened his mouth, a dry, croaking sound emerging. Amelia looked at him, and in her eyes, there was no anger. There was no triumph. There was only a profound, weary pity. She understood men like Walter Harrington. Her grandfather had warned her about them. Men who confused wealth with worth and arrogance with ability. They were hollow, he had said. Loud drums with nothing inside. It's okay, Mr. Harrington, she said, her voice quiet. You were scared. Everyone was scared. Her forgiveness was more damning than any accusation. It offered him no fight, no way to reclaim his shattered pride. It simply dismissed him as an irrelevance. He flinched as if she had struck him. He finally understood. He had spent his life building an empire of money and power, but in the moments that truly mattered, in the face of death, his empire was worthless. His legacy, at that moment, was one of foolishness and cowardice. Amelia's legacy, forged in the heart of a storm, was one of courage and skill. General Peterson, sensing the deep, unspoken currents of the conversation, stepped in. Miss Vance has been through a major ordeal. She needs to be debriefed and get some rest. He turned to one of his aides. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Harrington and their daughter to the passenger reception area. As the Harringtons were led away, Eleanor took one last look back at Amelia, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude and a dawning, uncomfortable understanding of the world she lived in. Her life of sheltered privilege had been saved by the daughter of the woman who cleaned her house. The foundations of her world had been shaken, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that nothing would ever be the same. Amelia's mother, Maria, was waiting in the reception center. She had been on a different part of the plane and had been evacuated earlier. The moment she saw Amelia walk through the door, flanked by military officers, she ran to her. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her so tightly Amelia could barely breathe. Mija, Maria whispered, using her childhood name for her. My brave, brave girl. I was so afraid. Amelia buried her face in her mother's shoulder, and for the first time since the ordeal began, the dam broke. The tears came, silent and hot. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a legendary pilot. She was a 15-year-old girl, and she was crying for her mom. The story of Trans-Pacific 788 became an international sensation overnight. The headlines were explosive. Teenage girl lands jumbo jet in superstorm. The ghost's granddaughter, a new hero in the skies. Maid's daughter saves hundreds in aviation miracle. The world was captivated. News channels played the audio recordings of the flight on a loop. Amelia's calm voice in the cockpit, her conversations with General Peterson, the terrified voice of the co-pilot. Aviation experts analyzed the flight data with disbelief, calling her actions one of the single greatest feats of airmanship in modern history. She had performed maneuvers in a commercial airliner that most fighter pilots wouldn't dare attempt. Amelia became an instant, and very reluctant, celebrity. She was whisked away to a secure military base with her mother, shielded from the relentless storm of media attention. The government, the airline, and the Air Force had a very serious situation on their hands. A civilian, a minor no less, had taken control of a commercial aircraft. While she had saved everyone on board, she had also broken dozens of federal aviation regulations. A quiet, high-level meeting was convened at the Pentagon. The room was filled with generals, FAA administrators, and grim-faced lawyers. The situation is unprecedented, a lawyer from the Department of Transportation stated flatly. Technically, what Miss Vance did could be construed as hijacking. She had no license, no authority to be in that cockpit. General Peterson, who had flown to Washington specifically for this meeting, slammed his hand down on the table. The sound echoed in the silent room. Hijacking, he roared, his face turning red. That hijacker is the only reason we are not discussing the worst aviation disaster in a decade. That hijacker saved 312 lives. That hijacker displayed a level of skill and courage that I have not witnessed in my entire 40-year career. We should be pinning a medal on her, not reading her Miranda rights. An FAA official cleared his throat. General, we understand the sentiment. But the regulations are clear. If we make an exception for her, what's to stop any passenger with a flight simulator from trying to take over a plane in an emergency? It sets a dangerous precedent. A dangerous precedent? Peterson shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The precedent she set was one of competence, of heroism. Are you really going to punish a girl for being too good? For knowing what to do when all the so-called professionals were panicking? He leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. Let me tell you about the precedent I care about. The one set by her grandfather, Michael Vance. He pushed the boundaries. He broke the rules when the rules were wrong. He saved countless lives by trusting his gut and his skill over some outdated manual. This girl is his legacy. And if you try to tarnish that, you will have to go through me and the entire United States Air Force. The room was silent. Peterson's words, and the power behind them, hung in the air. He was not just a general. He was one of the most respected military leaders in the country. To go against him was to go against a living institution. The debate raged for hours. But in the end, Peterson's fierce defense, combined with the overwhelming public adoration for Amelia, made the outcome inevitable. The official story was carefully crafted. Amelia Vance was granted a special, one-time waiver for her actions, citing the extreme and unprecedented circumstances. First Officer David Chen's report was glowing, stating that Amelia had acted only at his request and under his supervision, a convenient fiction that protected everyone involved. The airline, Trans-Pacific, facing a PR disaster of epic proportions, embraced Amelia as a hero, offering her and her mother free flights for life and a multi-million-dollar college scholarship. Amelia, however, wanted none of it. Not the fame, not the money, not the attention. When General Peterson came to tell her the news, he found her not in a fancy hotel suite, but in the base's aviation library, hunched over a thick, technical manual on advanced jet propulsion systems. "You're not celebrating?" he asked, a gentle smile on his face. Amelia looked up, pushing a stray strand of blonde hair out of her eyes. "There's nothing to celebrate, sir. A lot of things went wrong on that flight. I'm just trying to understand why." Peterson sat down opposite her. He looked at the complex diagrams she was studying. "You know," he said quietly, "your grandfather was the same way. After every mission, even the successful ones, he would lock himself away for days, analyzing every decision, every variable. He was never satisfied. He always believed he could have done better. He said that complacency was the enemy of excellence." Amelia murmured, her eyes still on the book. "That he did," Peterson agreed. He paused, then asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why, Amelia? Why do you do it? Why the obsession? It's more than just a hobby for you, isn't it?" Amelia closed the book. She looked out the library window, at the sleek fighter jets taking off and landing in the distance. "When I was little," she began, her voice soft and distant, "my grandpa used to take me to the roof of his house at night. He'd point to the stars, and he'd tell me about the vastness of it all. He said the sky wasn't a ceiling. It was an ocean, and to fly in it was to be truly free." She turned her gaze back to the general. "My mother, she's worked her whole life for other people, in other people's houses. She's the kindest, strongest person I know, but she's never been free. She's always been tied to the ground, to their rules, their schedules." A shadow of pain crossed her face. "Mr. Harrington gave us those tickets like he was giving scraps to a dog. He never saw us. He never saw my mother as a person, just as someone who served him." She took a deep breath. "When I'm flying, even in the simulator, none of that matters. It doesn't matter who your parents are, or how much money you have. The sky doesn't care. The plane doesn't care. It's just you, the machine, and the air. It's the only place where I feel equal. It's the only place where I feel completely me." General Peterson listened, his heart aching with a profound respect. He finally understood. For Amelia, flying wasn't about thrills or glory. It was about dignity. It was about transcending the small, cruel boxes that the world tried to put her in. It was her escape, her sanctuary, her freedom. "The Air Force is offering you a full scholarship to the academy," he said gently. "A fast track to the test pilot program. They want you, Amelia. We want you. You could be one of the greats." Amelia looked at him, and for the first time, a bright, genuine smile lit up her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the smile of a girl who had just been handed the keys to the entire sky. "I'd like that, General," she said. "I'd like that very much." Her journey was just beginning. The storm had been a test, a crucible that had forged her future. She had walked through the fire and emerged not as a victim, but as a commander. The world had tried to define her by her mother's job, by her social status, by her age. But Amelia Vance had shown them all that the only thing that truly defined a person was the size of their spirit and the height of their dreams. She was the ghost's granddaughter, and she was born to fly. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comments section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.